Hi, everyone. This is Stefani Rupert, host of the Meaning of Everything podcast, where we rethink, reinvent, and gain a deeper understanding of the stuff that matters most. Today is episode number 7, and that means that it's a recap episode. So last episode was episode number 6, and I had on Professor Eric Steinhardt, a brilliant philosopher, logician, computer scientist who is working to rethink our metaphysical worldviews, is working to build a spiritual vision on a scientific worldview that's very technological. It's built on information and complexity and bits, and it's really, really fascinating. So what I do in these recap episodes or debrief episodes is respond to listener questions about the topics at hand or anything else if it comes up, talk a little bit more personally, more practically about how these kinds of ideas matter or can be relevant to our personal lives, especially if we didn't get to it on the podcast. Basically, I here respond to your needs, to what you want. Some quick housekeeping before I jump in. Again, show notes for this episode will be at stefanirupert.com. As ever, I am giving away books to people who leave reviews of the podcast because thank you. Free books. If you want to know what books are available, there's very many and they're all awesome. So you don't have to look at the list of books if you don't want to. You can just trust me. Or you can go look at stefanirupert.com/book giveaway. You can find out what the books are that I'm giving away. But if you leave a review of the podcast, take a screenshot as you're leaving it and then email it to tmoeverything, all one word, lowercase, @gmail.com. And then you'll be entered into a drawing once weekly. That happens once weekly to get a free book. And again, that's just because I want to thank you. Unfortunately, I can't buy books for everybody. So it's a drawing. So yeah, these are the housekeeping issues. And now we can move on, respond to questions. So today's question about Professor Eric Steinhardt's work about spiritual naturalism, the first thing that I want to address comes from actually a colleague. So I don't have a question that somebody wrote in. It comes from a colleague who was very puzzled or interested in how these sorts of viewpoints one can change to them. One can, convert. One can convert to a spiritually naturalistic kind of view. Yes, one can, but the process is very interesting. So I'll give you my few cents on all of this sort of thing. So Professor Steinhardt's vision for spiritual naturalism is not unlike many of the things that I have encountered in my work over the course of the last 7 or so years. I've been deep in the field of what is known as religious naturalism. And this is where people are trying to construct, they call them religious, Eric calls them spiritual, trying to construct sacred, religious, something existentially important worldviews that are naturalistic, scientific. They don't have God concepts, supernatural, Jesus concepts, discarnate entities, spirits, ghosts, what have you. They're naturalistic. And it's a really big struggle. Most of the books that you find in the field will deliver this beautiful series of chapters on the metaphysics and epistemology and, yada, yada, philosophical foundations of these worldviews. And then in the final chapter, the author will often say, so far as how these ideas might be implemented in real life, I don't know, somebody else has to do it. And that's really unfortunate, but it's very real. The people who are engaged in designing these kinds of ideas are not the ones who are out and on the ground often. Sometimes they are, but they're not the ones like doing the daily practice of leading spiritual communities or blogging or whatever, writing podcast episodes. And so it's really hard, to sort of see how these kinds of visions can be realized, if or should they be realized. That's another question, and that's a very, very important question. So that aside, just knowing that that's true, processes of conversion, when you come from any kind of beliefs, when you decide that you're dissatisfied, when you're looking for something, and say you stumble upon this spiritual naturalism that Professor Steinhardt proposes, or any of the religious naturalisms that I've encountered, what is that process like? So I attended seminary for my master's degree, and in the first few weeks of being there, I was at a very liberal seminary at Boston University. And in the first few weeks of being there, we did a lot of biblical criticism. We talked about science. I was so amazed. The professors there, the team, the administration was not shying away from the realities of today's world, was not shying away from science, was not shying away from philosophy in our culture, and all of the things that have happened and realities that we have to face. And so many of the students who had faith with a capital F, faith in the biblical stories, or in God, or in Jesus existing in a particular way, in a particularly personal way, in the first few weeks, went through serious existential crises. And I had a close friend who told me, and he had grown up in a fundamentalist, evangelical home, what have you. And he said, there's something that, there's a sacred shimmer there was to his world. And then when that vision broke for him, the sacred shimmer, the light coming through the trees, the droplets of water, falling off of a flower or whatever, the things that you see that make life feel sacred, all of a sudden they lose their sacred edge, or they did for him. Converting, and especially from a worldview where you hold on to beliefs that are, deeply important to you, can be shattering. And it happens for people in so many different ways. When you move away from a capital F kind of faith and move into something closer to what Professor Steinhardt does, which is arguably a faith of its own sort, but with a lowercase f, and lots of footnotes and apologies and caveats and what have you. It's very self-critical, and it's the word he used was liberating. And in a sense, yes, knowledge of yourself and understanding can be very liberating, but liberation is often terrifying. And we see this time and time again in our lives, that liberation can be wonderful and exultant, but also terrifying. And so what do you do about that? Where do you find your comforts in any kind of process of conversion? A lot of conversion cases, actually, according to data, according to studies, it's about your religious community. A lot of people move just because they're persuaded by factors that are not having much to do with the doctrine. Maybe you're dissatisfied with your minister, or you don't like the way that they're interpreting things, or you don't fit in the community, or you don't like the cookies after whatever. A lot of these conversion experiences that we see are actually about community and connection, and where you fit and where you feel good, and how spaces take care of you. And so something that I think is really important, if you happen to be going through some sort of seeking moment or conversion experience, or deciding that you want to find something new for yourself, something that's a spiritual naturalism, and maybe especially in this case, you do not necessarily have a community to turn to. So you could find a community, a religious community or otherwise, and live within it and keep your own values. Find one that's very open, find one that's very flexible. I am a huge fan of the Unitarian Universalist Church. I'm not technically a member, but close. I love them dearly, and they're very open and welcoming to people asking questions. As a matter of fact, it's one of their foundational principles to support you in the exploration of questions and in finding your own answers. So you can find a community perhaps like that. You can go it on your own. But in this case, specifically. And in both cases, one of the most important things we need in times of crisis is to be around supportive people. It's to be in communities, it's to be held, to feel that community warmth, that safety. And it's a vanishingly hard thing to find in the modern West. But studies have also shown that this is far and away one of the most important things for our ability to feel good in multiple ways. Feeling good is infectious, and the kind of feeling good that comes from being in community is perhaps one of the most infectious. It relieves the weight of any kind of existential crisis you might be going through. It's the community. And so if you are seeking, I would say find a place where the community is good, where they'll support you in your search. And as for how to do that, there are so many different ways. We have Google now. You can find different religious communities, volunteering communities, communities based on common interests. You can find groups of atheists and agnostics and New Age spiritualists and naturalistic spiritualists, what have you, on places like meetup.com. You can find these kinds of forums, go to conferences. Religion and science people in the field have, conferences all over the world, and like a nice summer conference on an island in New England. And so anyway, all of which is to say that these types of things exist. And so if you are thinking about journeying into something like spiritual naturalism, where maybe it's a little bit scary, maybe you're letting go of something that has been important to you for a long time, maybe at some point in your life your faith has been shattered. There is a lot there, but one of the things that I would most recommend is finding people in your life to hold your space. That is definitely a kind of power all its own that can carry you through those transitions. Another colleague, I was having coffee with them the other day. Another colleague was, when I told him about Eric's work, was really curious about, and we talked about this in the podcast with Eric, was really curious about the viability of these kinds of beliefs. Like, are we going to be able to convince people? Are we going to be able to convince people to like adopt that kind of worldview? And Eric, Professor Steinhardt, said it would take maybe hundreds of years. And I think he's absolutely correct that kind of change does not happen quickly. And I don't think that, and do I think this kind of change needs to happen? Yes and no. I think we need to adapt. I think we need to embrace science. I do not think that religious traditions need to die. I do not think that we need to bury Christianity or Judaism or Taoism or what have you. I really believe that we can keep these traditions alive and transform them. And I think the way to do that is to embrace them as narratives, to embrace the power of their symbols, to maybe change what they represent, but still carry those narratives. And so I think those kinds of religions can and should survive. I think looking for one particular world order, one world religion is never going to happen and shouldn't. Difference is as important as unity. But this kind of worldview, I think, can and should flourish too, especially, popping up into all of the vacancies that we're seeing in people's, religious, spiritual lives, what have you, in the modern world. And so people can sort of choose or feel their way into what is best or nothing or what have you. And then this kind of spirituality, this kind of thinking, and we have another guest on, episode 5, perhaps, talking about, the limitations of science as a worldview. Can everybody relate to science as something that's sacred or that facilitates a relationship with the sacred? Can science be a source of wonder for us? That's Lisa Sedaris's question. Can science be a viable source of wonder? For a lot of people, no, I don't think so. But for many, yes. And that's why I think these kinds of worldviews are viable, but they don't have to be embraced by everybody. We don't need to ram a particular vision down people's throats. We just want everybody to have a nice vision and hope that we can get along. And yes, I have preferences and personal preferences, and I think some are better than others. Yes. But I think that is going to be the way that we pick our way through this. And hopefully through a lot of talking and a lot of listening. And speaking of which, I've been talking for a while now. These debrief episodes are quick. So I'm going to go. Quick reminder. If you want a free book, or want to be entered into a giveaway for a free book, send a snapshot of your review to tmoeverything@gmail.com. Then you'll be entered into the giveaway. I am Stefani Ruper. You can find me at my website, stefaniruper.com, and Facebook and Insta. Thank you so much for listening. Please always feel free to send your questions and concerns through the social media outlets or the TMOE Everything email account. Thank you so much for listening, and I will talk to you next time. Take care.